Todd Cole. Welcome to the replay of our YouTube live video. And today we're going to talk about some very interesting concepts. We're going to talk a little bit about pressure on the feet, where it should be in setup, and then also I'm going to dive pretty deep into some data that we've been compiling over the last 4 or 5 years. And a lot of this comes from, I did a couple poll questions last week on our Twitter feed. So if you're not following us there, be sure to follow, hopefully my Twitter feed, also, Todd Cole, and then also ours at US Golf TV, where we put out a couple questions about where should the pressure on your feet be at address. Also some questions about how far should your first putt be after a missed green regulation. And the reason I chose those two topics to kind of put out and get some feedback on is that they're two areas that sometimes there's some pretty good debate about. So we're going to dive into those today and hopefully educate you a little bit. So first of all, though, before we dive into that too much, I got to give a shout out. We got my main guy, Nick, behind the camera. Nick, say hi to the group.
Hello, everybody.
So Nick's, he's holding the camera today, and he's doing a heck of a job with that. One of our tripods kind of went on the blank. So if it gets a little shaky, that's because Nick probably had too much coffee this morning. But so hopefully if you have any questions on what I'm going to dive into here a little bit today, be sure to put them in the comments. I love hearing from you whether you agree or disagree. That's okay. Part of this whole process and why we're doing some of these live videos is to create some interaction, some dialogue, we can all learn a little bit. So I want to start first of all with some pressure on the feet. So first of all, when we talk about pressure on the feet, most golfers typically, when I say the word pressure, what they relate that to is weight. So they say, okay, I got all my weight on my left side, or I got all my weight on the right side. And in golf terms, in instruction terms, we typically talk more in terms of pressure. And that's why, we use here at the Academy the Swing Catalyst system. And what that allows us to do is dive kind of a little bit deeper into what's actually happening in the golf swing. Where's the pressure in the feet working? How is the golfer interacting with the ground? And so one of the phrases that we use a lot here, and this is going to probably answer the question for those of you who took the time to kind of put that in there. It was pretty interesting to see that most golfers, we had a kind of a split between 60% starts on the left, 40 on the right, or lead and trail, and then just the opposite. We had very few people who thought that the pressure on the feet should be 50-50, which I found pretty interesting because most golf instruction generally would say that you want to be 50-50, but we didn't really get many answers there. We had either 60 left or lead or 60 on the trail, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So here's the answer to the question in terms of how I teach it. I like to have 60 on the lead and 40 on the trail. So we use a phrase that we call 60-40. Now, there's no magic behind exactly 60 and 40. What we want is we want the student to have a little bit more pressure on the lead foot versus the trail foot, precisely so that they can kind of instigate or start their golf swing in a nice, smooth, rhythmic motion. Now, why is that? Well, here, I got an example. So this is an example of a student here at the Academy, well-known student. And so right now, in this particular moment, and whether you can see this on the screen or not, I'm not sure, but we're 55 on the lead and we're 45 on the right. Now, when we're a little bit heavy on the lead side, what that allows us to do is it allows us to kind of push off the lead side. So if I have a little bit more on my lead, for me, my left, and I'm set up here, that gives me the ability to kind of what I call unweight. So I'm able to kind of push off my lead and get into my trail foot, which is exactly what we want. And I think most good golfers who have good rhythm and flow to their initial takeaway, which is the key component to having a good golf swing, start a little left and then start a little lead so they can push off into the trail. So if we were to watch this here, Nick, if you can kind of zoom in maybe up over here on the feet. So we're 55 left or 45 right. So we use a 60-40, but that's great. So what you're going to see here is as we start the swing, and this particular golfer has beautiful rhythm. Beautiful rhythm. So she actually starts to increase this a little bit before the club starts to move. So she's initially set up here. She's about a 55 left, 45 right. And then as we start the swing, we see a little bit of push into the left, upwards to 62% left. And then we start unweighting. So this increase on the left side allows us to create some consistent rhythm. And so that's one of the reasons why we have, a nice takeaway. So let's go ahead and look, Nick, let's go ahead and look at another one here. I'm going to pull up another one if I can. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if does that make sense, kind of what we're talking about? Hopefully it does. So we start a little left heavy, we push off that to create some rhythm and some flow. So here's another one. Now this particular golfer, you can tell up here, Nick. Now this, you can see the traces on both of these golfers are completely different, and that's a whole nother video, but this particular student is 50-50, which is okay. Preferably we might see a little bit more on the left side, the lead side, but you'll see what she'll do pretty early is we start to unweight. So meaning we start moving off the lead side into the trail side. So now we can see very early in the backstroke, we go from a 50-50, and now we're down to, early in the backstroke, we're already down to 39 left, 61 right. Okay, so the point being there is that if we can start a little bit lead side heavy, we can push and get into the right trail heel pretty quickly and pretty easily. So that's exactly why we wouldn't want you to start the opposite. So some people in the poll, was interesting, said that they think that the pressure should be sitting on the trail side. So they thought maybe it'd be 60 back, 40 right. Well, if you're already back here, you don't have the ability to create that movement and that natural momentum into the trail side. So hopefully that makes sense. That's why we like the 60-40. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but a little left heavy so you can push off it and work into the trail side is pretty good there. All right. Let's move on to the next topic. The other poll question that we had to deal with how far away from the hole, or what would be the length of the first putt you'd have after a missed green in regulation. And we gave a couple different answers. I think one of them was like 4 or 5 feet. Nick, does that sound about right?
Yep.
And then the other one was 4 to 5 feet. I think it was like 6 to 8 feet. And then like 9 to 11 feet, or I'd have to look exactly, but in that time, in that general thought there. So what I've got here is this is data that we've been collecting over the last, like I said, 3 or 4 years. And so you're going to probably find different data, wherever you might find something that looks a little bit different, but this is the data that we have, and I think it's going to make a point. So I've got it kind of broken down into different categories. The first one is what we call like a pro or a really top amateur golfer. I mean, this is high level golf. Then the 71 to 73 scoring range, 77 to 79, 85 to 89 scoring range, and then 90 to 99 scoring range. And I kind of broke those down because each one of you watching this, you can kind of figure out, okay, where's my scoring range, and give me some guidelines. So the gold standard, in my opinion, the gold standard for the average length of the first putt after a missed green in regulation is 7 feet. That's the gold standard. Now, I know some of you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute. I watch TV and I see the guys or the gals, when they miss a green, I mean, they chip the ball up to like 2 or 3 feet. And you're 100% correct. A lot of times they do that, and that's probably why they're on TV that particular week. But what we're talking about is the totality of it, the entire average of it. So are there times when they chip the ball to 3 feet? Of course they do. All right? But there's also times where maybe they chip it to 15 or 20 feet. And so when you start looking at all of them, you average them together, 7 feet. So this particular, what we've got here is 6.8 feet, which would be gold standard. All right? 71 to 73 scoring range, 8.2. So not a big difference there. But as we start to talk a little bit about the putting conversion, we're going to see how this ties together. 77 to 79 is just over 10 feet. 85 to 89 is 12, a little over 12, almost 12 and a half feet. And then 90 to 99 is 16 and a half feet. So you can see, you start to see how this slowly gets, of course, a little bit further away from the cut. Now, what does that mean? Well, one of the things I want you to think about is what I like to call the linkage of skills. Linkage of skills. And what I mean by that is that when we start to see real change in golf scores, it's when skills start to link together. So let's think about this for a second, and we're going to tie it into what we're doing with the chipping and the putting. Let's say somebody improves their driving skill. They drive the ball in the fairway more often. But the next skill after the drive is, typically an iron shot into the green. Well, if their iron skill, their iron shots are not very good, they don't get the benefit of improving the first skill, which is the driving. But when they can link those two skills together, all of a sudden, the scores start to come down. So they improve their driving by, let's say, 10%. They improve their iron play by 10%. Now you're linking two skills together that work together back to back, and all of a sudden the scores start to go down quite a bit. And so that's why people, when you're thinking of improving your game, you have to think in terms of linking certain skills together. It doesn't do you any good to improve your putting drastically. I mean, it does, but if you don't also improve your chipping and your bunker play and those types of things. So let's tie this all together. So let's look at the make percentages. And now once again, when you're watching golf on TV, of course you're seeing the guys or the gals who are making a higher percentage than the normal for that week, and that's why they're having great weeks. But when we look at the totality of it, a pro or an amateur from 5 to 9 feet is going to be roughly making around 50%. Now that's a pretty big range, 5 to 9 feet. At 5 feet, they're certainly making more than 50%. But at 9 feet, they probably aren't making 50%. So when we kind of look at that, and once again over the course of the season, 50%, give or take, is going to be pretty close. 71 to 73 is 48%. 36%, 85 to 89, 26%, and 90 to 99, around 22%. Make percentage. Then when we go to 9 to 15 feet, of course it's going to decrease quite a bit here. So almost half, even for a top level player or a professional, 25%. 71 to 73, 22, 13, 4, and as we get to our 90 to 99s, actually they're going to 3-putt more often than they are 1-putt. All right, so that hopefully kind of makes sense in terms of those two different skills. So when you start linking them together, that's when we start seeing scores come down. So let's look at a tour pro. Their average first length of putt after a missed green regulation is around 7 feet, gold standard. And then when we go to the area of the 5 to 9 feet, which is where those balls would come to rest, they're making about 50%. So you start tying those two skills together at the top level, you start to understand why tour professionals and top level amateur golfers are getting the golf ball up and down over 50% of the time. And especially when they're playing well, they're probably upwards of 80%, 85% when they have weeks when they're really hot and really playing well. So let's look at a 77 to 79 shooter. So 77 to 79 shooter. Now their average chip shot, all right, is a little over 10 feet. And when we go down to how many of those putts are they making, well, if their average one is 10 feet, they're falling kind of into this category of 9 to 15 feet. All right, and that distance-wise, they're probably making around 13%, or maybe a little bit more than that, because they have more putts around the 10 feet versus the 15 feet. But you can start to see where they're only probably getting up and down around 20-25% of the time. However, what if they improved their chipping and they got it down to here where they're more along this range of the 7 foot? Well, now all of a sudden, their putts around the 7 feet length, now all of a sudden they're getting up and down more like 35 to 40% of the time. They're starting to link some skills together. All right, so hopefully some of that kind of makes sense a little bit in terms of what it is that we're looking for in terms of how far we should be away from the cup when we're chipping after missed green regulation, what type of percentages that you're making. But most importantly, what I want you to take away from this discussion is the concept of linking skills together. All right, it's great to improve your putting. Obviously, it's going to help your score. But if you can combine that with the skill that's related to right around it, which is chipping, okay, then you're going to start to see real benefit in your game. If you make an effort to improve your driving, and you can combine that with better iron play, now you're linking those two together, your scores are going to drop quite a bit. So hopefully that makes sense. Also, a little bit of our discussion to recap there once again on the pressure in the feet. Here's all we're saying is that to create some good rhythm and some flow in the motion, you want to start a little lead side heavy. You know, we use a phrase 60-40, so you can kind of push off that and get into the trail foot and create some rhythm, some flow. And we'll do more videos about, okay, after the start, where does it go from there? All right, we'll dive into that a little bit. We'll continue to dive into some of that. So thanks for your time. Like I said, be sure to follow us on our US Golf TV on our Twitter feed, also on our Instagram feed. Myself also, I'm on Twitter and on Instagram. And we'll be continuing to throw out these questions and hopefully getting some feedback from you in terms of what it is you want to learn about and how we can help you play better golf. So thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing you the next time we do a live video.